Hi, welcome everyone who's joining. Welcome to our webinar. Again, my name is Jeannie Staten. I'm in South Carolina. It is so great to see everybody joining. We're about at start time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Jeannie Staten. I am in South Carolina. I am very joyed to welcome you. We are so happy to have Stacy Chu from Rochester Community and Technical College, along with Amy Klein from Laerdal Medical. We are going to present to you the webinar on enhancing competency-based education in nursing, simulation solutions for learners and faculty. I want to give a special shout out to our Odin partners. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So on today's webinar, we are going to allow for multiple and frequent opportunities for learners to demonstrate and assess their progression to competence. We will also share how programs can engage in various experiential learning activities, along with provide data-driven insights for understanding learners' opportunities and strengths. So again, please, we welcome Amy Klein from Laerdal Medical and is going to go ahead with this webinar. Amy.
Thanks, Jeannie, for getting us started. Like Jeannie said, I'm Amy Klein. I'm a nurse and a nurse educator by background. I've taught in undergrad and also on the practice side of education. So been working in simulation for a little too long now, maybe about 15 years. But it's been a great journey, and I'm excited to talk with you guys today about how simulation can help with competency-based education initiatives. I'm the head of competency-based education for Laerdal Medical, so it's kind of a fun new role of how can we best support faculty in healthcare education. So I want to just open up by saying, why are we talking about competency-based education? And it's really important to note that, while improving learner outcomes is not a new priority at all in healthcare education, our previous approaches to education have really not made significant strides to close that gap in practice from education to practice, that quality gap. We've seen these shortfalls of preparedness among healthcare professionals that are entering today's workforce growing in its challenge. Back in 2005, only 35% of new grads in nursing were prepared for practice. And then in 2017, a newer study revealed that 23% of new grads were considered competent as novice registered nurses. And then again in 2020, Kavanaugh and Sharpneck found that only 9% of new grads were demonstrating adequate competence as they entered practice. And so, with this kind of alarming trend downward in competency preparedness, there's certainly multiple factors at play. A lot of that has to do with the acuity of our patients, the management of our comorbidities. There's certainly more factors, but one of those two is to challenge how we train and develop our learners. And so the thought is that if we can focus on competency development, will help get better patient outcomes and will help save lives ultimately. So we really need for something, and that hope is that competency-based education will be this transition that will help healthcare disciplines have greater transparency in sharing what's expected of new grads when they enter practice, and then that those new grads will be better equipped to meet the demands of today's healthcare environment. Sorry, I'm trying to run multiple screens. I'm sure you all know that feeling really well. So how do nurse educators better focus on competency development, right? That's what we feel like we've always been doing and what we've been dedicated to, and it has been. But the National League for Nursing and the American Association for the Colleges for Nursing, both are kind of calling on nursing education to look at competency-based education, or at least look at the principles of competency-based education as a potential solution. While it's not a mandate for programs to embrace this form of education, I do think it's worth looking at closely, which I'm sure is what brought many of you here today. Hopefully some of your programs are interested in this and starting to explore how can competency-based education help our program. It's certainly not a new approach to education. CBE has been around for a very long time. really making its, I would say, biggest mark in healthcare, in higher education back in the 60s. And it's implementing CBE is really not a small task. It involves realigning your existing curriculum, looking at your teaching strategies, and how you provide feedback and opportunities for practice across your program. So we're going to spend our next few slides, or the next little bit of this presentation, talking about competency-based education and how simulation can help. And then we'll hear from Stacy at Rochester Community and Technical College to really show how she has embraced some of our Laerdal solutions to improve the competency of her learners. All right, so we're going to launch a little poll here to see where is your organization in its competency-based education journey. So you should be able to see a screen that just popped up, and it says, where is your organization? I've just started, I've not started, we're already mapping to new competencies, and then we're fully implemented. So if you guys wouldn't mind just selecting a choice, and we'll give you just a second. I'm not sure, Helen, if you're able to see on the back end how many people have answered, but we'll give you just a second to answer that.
They're
Yes.
coming in, Amy. Yes.
Yeah,
Perfect.
they're coming
Thank you.
in. We're at
Sorry,
about
I
50.
can't see that.
Yep. We'll just give it another minute.
Give it one more minute. So go ahead. And if none of these suit you as where you are in the journey, certainly feel free to enter it in the chat. It's always fun to hear what you guys are up to in the chat as well. All right.
Excellent. We're ending the poll.
Thank you. And can everyone see the results, or is it just me?
Nope.
I think everyone can, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Stacy. So, we've got kind of a big split here. We have, about a quarter of the people who are just starting, another a little over a quarter who have not started, and a quarter who are starting to map. And then just a few shout outs who have fully implemented. So that is wonderful. And I'm really excited to hear that we're in this space. It's actually very consistent with the information we got from Laerdal customers back in the spring as well. Actually closing a little bit, which is great, right? The past 6 months, programs have maybe started implementing a little bit more CBE into their programs. But I just like to normalize this, that this is a new journey for the majority of healthcare education segments. And so especially in nursing, we don't see that every school is doing this and a few schools are behind. Everyone's really growing together. And so I think it's important too that we level set with the definition on competency-based education. The definition can really vary depending on the context that it's from. Sorry, my screen just almost went to sleep on me. It can really vary on the context of the segment that is being represented or who is providing that definition, whether it's AACN, NLN. But the biggest thing to focus on is that it's a learner-centered approach to education, and it's really emphasizing the learning outcomes. So it's about giving students ability to demonstrate their knowledge rather than just show that they know. They need to demonstrate the ability to apply the knowledge that they've been given. And when we look at the principles of CBE, it's really talking about shifting away from a focus on knowledge acquisition that's teacher-driven, of being the expert on the stage and telling students what they need to know, and really shifting more into that learner-centered approach with multiple opportunities to practice that also come with frequent feedback from those formative assessments. And frequent individualized feedback, I should say. So it's something we've been really doing in nursing education more and more, I would say, especially as we've embraced simulation as part of our curriculum. But we need to be a bit more purposeful and provide even more opportunities. It doesn't mean tests are going away or that semesters are going away. And while those might be things that your program is looking for, those can sometimes be really overwhelming and scary. And so today, we really want to make sure that this isn't something that you feel like you have to do on your own when you're implementing CBE, but we really want to look at how we're teaching and how we're assessing and where can we provide a little bit more opportunity for students to demonstrate. So we think that this is really where Laerdal can come into play. Simulation and CBE work together really nicely. And while we have a really large portfolio of products and solutions that can help, we're just going to review a few of those today that can help develop your learners' competencies, specifically around their patient care abilities. And we know that one aspect of CBE that's really important is the concept of scaffolding the learning experiences. And so you want to be introducing content and concepts in a way that students build their foundational knowledge before moving on to the more complex learning situations. So we found it beneficial to look at Miller's pyramid when we're scaffolding our learning methods or our modalities to meet the learners where they're at. If you're not familiar, Miller's pyramid is a way to assess competency through performance. It comes from medical education mostly, but I just really think it's a great visual representation to say, you know, how can we build some fundamental skills, and then when do we know we're ready to move on and challenge our learners a little bit more? So I'm going to use this as an analogy as we move through today for the products that we're going to review. So let's walk through how we can help move from fundamental skills all the way up through complex decision-making experiences in our learners. So first is the fundamental skills. And so, you know, we can think of these as psychomotor skills, of course, which is kind of what first comes to mind, especially with the photos I've selected on the slide today. But these might also be cognitive or affective skills that you're trying to build in those domains. We know that students need to understand basic anatomy and physiology before they can go and assess a radial pulse, right? They have to know where that pulse point is before they can actually feel for it. And so in that same way, students have to learn how to perform technical skills before they can expertly intervene with those in the right circumstance for a patient, right? It doesn't help to know how to place an IV if you don't know when to place an IV. You can certainly be told, but we know that critical thinking is much more important in nurses than just being told when to do things. And so when we think about our Laerdal solutions, we're really well known for task trainers for these psychomotor skill practice. And we really provide a lot of different opportunities for students to practice their skills. And one that I want to highlight today is our modular skills trainer. I like the module skills trainer because when we think about competency-based education, a lot of the principles around it talk about empowering students to learn on their own and providing them with resources that allow for flexibility when and where and how they learn. And so the modular skills trainer is built to feature 16 different clinical skills that you can train on in one task trainer. It's really designed to fit the needs of today's nursing schools by providing students with the skills they're really expected. We know that these 16 are things that people expect, but then with an interchangeable kind of packaged all-in-one box device. So students can take this home, they can bring it to the lab, you could even bring it to clinical. So that ease of use and storage after really allows for flexibility to say, hey, let's bring this task trainer home and practice our skills tonight, or let's pack it up and take it to clinical so that if you have to place an NG this week, for example, and you haven't done that in a while, we'll be able to do that. And the modular skills trainer is available as a standalone skills trainer, of course, but it also becomes extremely powerful when we pair it with sim capture for skills. It allows for this competency building solution to be built on digital assessment and evaluations. And so Sim Capture for Skills is a part of our larger solution called Sim Capture. And Stacy's going to talk a little bit later today about what Sim Capture is and how she's actually used it in her program. So I won't go on too much, but it is a cloud-based assessment and evaluation platform that allows, that organizes your curriculum into a hands-on way for your students to have a little bit more control over when they practice their skills. So you can customize your digital evaluations through templates. Instructors can create them on their own. Oh, sorry, forgot to advance my slide. So you can have multiple different evaluations up for your students to be able to choose from. They can read through instructions on their own of what's expected of them, and then they can go through and actually see the steps of a checklist and check themselves off as they move through. They can also practice in a peer-to-peer practice session, meaning they can allow their peer to pull up the checklist, coach them and guide them through, or even assess their performance of them when they're ready. Students also have the option of a self-record. So once they've practiced on their own a few times, they can then set up their mobile device and record themselves completing that skill so that faculty can then check it off. It really allows them to have a little bit more flexibility of how often they're able to practice and then also where they're able to do that. Also giving faculty the ability to say, you know, I can't sit in the lab for 18 hours every single week to check off all these skills, but I can watch videos and be able to assess and provide feedback when I need to. Students are also given immediate feedback on their performance through those checklists that you've created, and they get an overall score that allows them then to break that score down and be focused on exactly which steps and which areas they needed more assistance in. Sorry, I know I'm talking fast. I want to make sure we can get it all through. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, the next kind of step in the pyramid is about building those basic decision-making skills. So we know that students know a skill, but do we know that they know how to do it and when to do it? Can they put it into a practice situation? And so this is really that beginning. There we go. And this is where next generation vSim for nursing, which is our screen-based simulation solution, can really come into play for students. It has 10 different content areas. So really, again, tapping into those CBE principles of allowing students to practice patient care across multiple contexts of care. You know, can they take care of a post-op patient in med-surg, in critical care, in mental health? How does that assessment look different when you vary the context that the student is in? And so vSim really allows, like I said, for students to have those multiple contexts of care, but it also leans into the principles of self-directed learning. And so students are able to go through these scenarios on their own. They don't need a facilitator to direct them. They just need someone to assign it to them, of course, and have it be available as part of their course. But they move through some pre-work, a simulation, a quiz, and then they enter into their simulation and a post-quiz to be sure that they have got the learning outcomes that were supposed to be delivered. It also allows for deliberate practice. So as students move through, you're going to see on screen here, this is someone navigating through a vSim situation. The benefit here is that students really have to critically think through what they're experiencing in this program. So they receive report and then they have a clinical judgment exercise like this that you're seeing that helps them to really focus in on what's going on with the patient and make sure they have the right understanding before even entering the patient's bedside. And then they have this ability to walk through the patient's chart, do their assessments, ask the patient questions, and really be able to hone in on those specific concepts that you want your learners to understand through this activity. They can put it all together, but they also get the independence to pause, to say, I don't really know if that's what this medication is, or I don't know if that's an abnormal assessment finding that I'm seeing. I'm going to pause, look it up, go back to my resources that were referenced earlier, and make sure that I'm ready to complete this. And so having that ability to pause and walk away really allows students to be met where they are in terms of understanding the content. After they finish, they do get individualized feedback on their performance. So they not only get an overall score that says, you know, this is how well you achieved this scenario in the simulation, also in the SBAR activity that's included in every scenario. But students can also then see a detailed overview of how they performed and what actions they missed and might need to go back in and do again. Now, some folks don't like that they get this extremely detailed report, but I think the important thing to remember is that this is so helpful to your learners because it tells them where they're struggling. The 3 X's are kind of critical actions. It says, you know, you clearly struggled in this scenario. This student was really struggling with some medication issues. So they're going to need to go back and read up on medication administration, maybe remember the 5 rights or the 6 rights of medication administration before they go back. And then they can do that simulation again and see if after they've remediated a little bit of knowledge, are they then able to actually apply that knowledge again? They know clearly what's expected of them, but are they able to do that when a patient is short of breath or asking them questions? And so this gives them that time to go back and be deliberate in the practice of this is how I care for a patient, this is what's expected, but am I able to actually perform? And moving on through, I think this is probably one of the tiers we're best known for when you think about Laerdal is our simulators and our mannequins that we have. So sorry, 1 second. You're probably familiar with our mannequins the most, but you may or may not be familiar with Sim Capture, which is our typically known as our video recording system. It also can be center management and inventory management for simulation centers, but it also comes with really robust evaluation data. And so you can build your own custom evaluations for all of your simulations. And I'm not going to say too much more about that because Stacy has so much to show you on that I don't want to take away because she can say it much better than I can with her actual experience. But I do want to highlight nursing and simulator with this as well. Nursing and Simulator is really going to allow for students to move into realistic clinical scenarios where students can be guided by faculty as needed if you need during the simulation, but they also have the ability to practice in multiple contexts of care with Nursing and Simulator. Again, this ability of having multiple opportunities to practice in different settings is so important. And so with Nursing and Simulator, she was built to be modular, so she can be really 4 people in one mannequin. So the 4 faces you see on the screen here represent the different it's so funny to say out loud, but the different skins that you can buy for her, where you can switch her from being a post-operative young male patient one week, and then she could be an elderly female patient the next week while using all the same hardware that's there, but just changing out the skin to allow for that flexibility and learning environment, so that students can continue to practice and see how the care they provide to a younger patient might differ from an older patient or vice versa within the same type of concept. And it really decreases your need for storing multiple mannequins. Skins store a little bit smaller than a full size mannequin. And so she was built by nurses and for nurses. And it's a really great solution when you're looking to up your simulation usage and be able to have this, ability to change demographics. And finally, I'd want to talk about the, kind of highest level of the pyramid when it comes to practicing and assessing competencies, and that's the complex decision making. Now, obviously, this can be done in the clinical environment where students really interact with patients, and it should be done there, absolutely, at the bedside. But we also want to provide realistic and immersive scenarios for students to be participating in that can be extremely difficult to guarantee in the clinical or simulation environments as well. And so I want to talk for a little bit about our VR Clinicals solution for nursing. Immersive virtual reality technology has shown learning benefits that they create almost the same memories as being in a true real life experience because of the level of immersion that students or that learners feel. And so when we looked at this research at Laerdal, we partnered with Wolters Kluwer and the National League for Nursing to say, what's missing from clinical experiences for nursing students that VR could be a really great tool to utilize this for. And we found that one key element that was missing throughout the research was that novice nurses really struggle with that time management, delegation, and prioritization between multiple patients. And so we developed our virtual reality solution to target exactly that. We wanted to provide multiple opportunities for students to practice how to prioritize between patients, to improve their decision-making skills, and to learn how to manage interruptions in patient care, and then practice appropriate delegation. I think this is one of my favorite things that we've done because I know that it's really complex to provide multi-patient simulations. It's really hard to guarantee that students can actually take care of multiple patients in a clinical unit all the way throughout your program. And we know that when students come out, they're not taking care of 1 or 2 patients. They're having many more if they're in, a med-surg or standard unit. And so VR Clinicals for Nursing has 3 different levels across it. We have a beginner level where the patient cases are built in this predictable patient progression that's really appropriate for your beginner level nursing students. There are some interruptions, but they're minimal. So students start to get that understanding of just because I'm with one patient doesn't mean my other one doesn't exist. I might need to keep thinking about them or even go over and see them. And across the beginner level, students can care for 2 patients, 3 patients, or 4 patients at a time. And they could care for all of those throughout a beginning level nursing program. And then at the intermediate level, we start to see a little bit increase in complexity. So the post-operative diagnoses, the medical surgical complications, and then some interruptions that do require delegation. And again, students have the ability to care for 2, 3, or 4 patients across that level. And then in advanced, we start to see things that really would challenge and stretch learners. So those unexpected complications, the urgent interruptions that really require higher level delegation, leadership, and follow-up from the learner. And again, the 2, 3, or 4. So as you can see, as students move throughout the VR clinical experience, not only do the patients become more complicated in terms of, changing status and acuity, but the interruptions also become more complicated and have a little bit higher demand in nursing leadership. And I just want to show you how this is structured, and then I'll show you a little snip of the video as well. But students, before they go in, it's kind of similar to the VSIM experience where they get a little bit of time to prepare just like they would on a real patient. They can review the SBAR, they can get report on the patient, they can look through the EHR, and decide what their plan of care is. And whether they have 2, 3, or 4 patients that they're caring for, they'll prioritize which patient are they going to see first and provide rationale for why they're going to do that. Then they go through the simulation experience, a reflection exercise, and can move to debriefing. You also could create a part, or you could add a second part to this where they go back into the simulation and continue caring for those 2, 3, or 4 patients one more time throughout a shift. So they can see how the morning care goes and then how it unfolds in the afternoon, or you can do them each as standalone. So you can do a 2-part or just a single part as well. But during that actual simulation, students will be faced with interruptions and things that make them think about what's going on with the patient. Here's just a short little clip. There we go. So once students are prepared, they can enter into the headset and head into the environment. And there on the screen, you can see some notes underneath each patient's name. So anything that students prepared on, they can make a note in, and then it'll show up in their goggles so that they have, their kind of brain sheet in front of them in the virtual world. This doesn't require a facilitator or instructor to moderate the session. Once students are in, they're completely independent to go and complete their patient cares. They can, do all the standard wash hands and all of those things. They also can get vital signs on their patients, conduct physical assessments, interact with the patient and ask questions. And all of that is done through their digital devices. You can see here the nurse is going to go in and examine the patient. And then I'm just going to click a little far ahead. But here you can see one of those on-screen interruptions. So the charge nurse has called and said that their patient next door is not feeling well. This student is deciding to leave their current patient and go see the next patient. They also could have pulled up their smartwatch and delegated that care to someone else, whether that's, can you check on them? Can you get vitals? Or can you just go see what's going on? And then follow up, and the learner would get information. This is just showing you how they can head into the med room, get some medications, and go through it. And then whenever the student is done, they can end the session, or if they go through the time, it will end for them. And after they end this scenario, they will get, again, that individualized, immediate, and detailed feedback so that they understand what they were supposed to learn, how they performed, and what went on during the scenario prior to getting into a debriefing with your instructors. So students get this detailed feedback not only about what they did, but about how they prioritized during the sim, before they saw their patients, during the sim, and then after the simulation as well. They get this opportunity to see how well they prioritized. They still get that detailed review of critical actions taken or not taken, so they understand how their score was created from prioritization scoring, and then also the review of actions that were taken on each patient. They get to see their summary of how, from their reflection activities, and how they provided the rationale for prioritization. And then they also get some rationale around the recommended sim prioritization during the interruptions and from the beginning of the shift as well. So if they went to see one patient and we, really, because of ABCs, you should have seen another patient, they'll get some feedback about that linked to resources where they can try to understand that better, and then bring that to the debriefing as to, what are my questions of, I really wanted to go see Deborah first, but they said I should have seen Brandon. Here's the rationale, here's what I found, and it can really lead to some rich debriefs. And then finally, of course, you get the gradebook scoring for faculty and students to see how students performed and how many times they went through the scenarios. All right, I've been talking really fast. I appreciate you hanging with me. And one thing that I also wanted to, that we want to spend some time on here is that while our products are really working together, this is just a limited view of a few of our products and how they work together to build competence throughout a nursing program. But one thing, you know, when you teach nurses, we say if it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. And kind of the same rings true for learning, right? We want to make sure that our students have the opportunity to have all these experiences, but we also want to be sure that we're capturing their progression throughout the program in simulation, in skills training, and clinical, and creating data behind that for us to use and improve not only their learning outcomes, but also our programs. So I'm going to hand it now to Stacy Chu from Rochester Community and Technical College here in Rochester, Minnesota. And she's going to show us how she's been able to use sim capture with multiple products from Laerdal to document how her students have been performing throughout her program. So Stacy.
Thank you, Amy.
Yes.
I just want to say welcome to everybody. I see a few people from the San Francisco Bay Area. That's my hometown area. I'm now in Rochester, Minnesota, teaching at Rochester Community Technical College. I've been in simulation since 2010, and you know, really when I taught clinicals for many years before that, and I really find I think Sim's a great way to bridge that gap between what they have learned in school and how do they apply that when they're taking care of patients, because it's a great way where we can interact and we can control the environment and give them things that they may not have the opportunity to see in clinical, and they are forced to make decisions. And how does that come about? So I currently work at a local community college. We have an ADN program that's a 4-semester program, and then we also have a practical nursing program that's an 11-month program. Any given time, we have approximately about 400 students between the two programs, and they come through my sim lab at least once, if not 2 or 3 times a semester. So that's kind of my program in a nutshell. So really, why did we start this journey? You know, with me being the simulation coordinator, I run all the sims for our program, and I was having difficulty when I made changes to update because it's in our LMS system. Did I do that update for this course, or did I do this update for that course? And then I also had to get access to the course, and so there was a lot of things like that. When I first started with the Laerdal sim capture system, I really just got it because our AV system wasn't working for us. We had a lot of lag time. There was a lot of issues with it. I looked at this system and it worked. It was going to meet our needs for what I wanted for just live streaming what was going on in the sim room. Unbeknownst to me, there's all this evaluation and pre-sim stuff that I could do with it. And it really eased up my workload, so I had one spot to go to everything. The other piece is, as I started to look at evaluating sims, you know, as a simulationist, I would know, I could kind of have an idea, these students are doing really well. These students need some more help to be successful, but I didn't have any data to back it up. I had a lot of faculty that didn't understand sim well, and they weren't certain how sim fits into the program. And so, you know, they wanted data. Well, okay, let's take a look at the data. I don't have any. How can I get that data? And then meeting up with my impact manager, Erin, through Laerdal, showing me how the evaluation tools can be used in sim capture just opened up my world. Because beforehand, I was trying to keep track of this data with paper and putting it into Excel spreadsheets or various different survey online pieces. So I had things all over the place. I'm not sure, has anybody else had kind of that struggle of how do we collect this data? How do we put that data together? Please feel free to share what you've been doing to collect data in your program in the comments if you would like. Finally, when we went through accreditation, looking at that standard where we had to say, how do we know if our students are meeting our program student learning outcomes? And we had some feedback from our accreditors and having to relook at that. And they all looked at me, Stace, can we do something like that in sim? And of course I said, sure, let's give it a try. And we went from there. Go ahead, Amy. So long process short, because I have just a short amount of time here, we stumbled upon the Creighton Competency Evaluation Tool, and I put that up here for you to kind of reference and take a look at. We chose this tool because it can be adaptable to what your needs are, because this just gives you kind of the framework, but then you have to define each and every one of these points. So with a particular scenario, what do you mean by obtaining pertinent data in that scenario? What one scenario could mean could be different from a different scenario. So really going through and defining some of that. And we were able to then map that to our end of program student learning outcomes. So on the next slide, I will show you how I kind of done this with the SimCapture evaluation tool. I put in, I want to obtain pertinent data. That was part of the Creighton competency tool. With this particular scenario, how do I define that is listed here. So obtaining the vital signs. Did they get all the vital signs? Did they miss the vital signs? This is a particular patient that is found down, brought into the emergency room and struggling with some different things. We're not sure. Did she hit her head? Did they do a neuro assessment? They're diabetic. Did they do a blood sugar check? Are they talking with the patient to get information from the patient as well? This is part of our mental health scenario. So are they also talking about feelings and goals and things like that? Are they thinking about the CAGE tool? So I define those and I assign points to those, and it all adds up to 1 point. And then I mapped it by a question category to our end of program student learning outcomes. And so this becomes really important when we go to the next slide. I can show you what I did was this, the evaluations will pull through, and so I can look at the mental health course overall of how did we meet our end of program student learning outcomes. And you can see here, you know, professionalism was up in the 80%, but caring was down below 70%. So, you know, how do we look at that? Collaboration's right around that 70 percentile mark. We'd like those students to be more successful in that area. So let's take a deeper dive and look at the next set of information here. If you want to go to the next slide, Amy. Here, I took a look at, you know, is it a particular scenario that I'm running in mental health? So I run 3 different scenarios. I do an aggressive patient, I do a suicide, I do a panic attack. Is there one that they're really struggling in? As you can see with professionalism, the panic attack, they're struggling in that one. But the other 2, they're doing pretty good. Where there's some like the next professionalism, they're pretty similar across the board. So now I can take a look a little bit deeper and look at things, and I can do a question analysis of my rubrics that I put into SimCapture. And this is really kind of cool how this does this. I don't know if anybody's used the point by serial with testing, but now we can even do that with Sim and with our evaluations in Sim. And where this goes, how this works is they determine the quality of the question or the assessment item. And they take the top 20% and the lower 20% and see, is it a predictor? Is it a good predictor of how well they did or wouldn't do in the scenario? A positive number means they did really well. A negative number means it didn't correlate very well. So on the second obtain pertinent data, because I separated this out for the question categories, that was very particularly important of how successful they would be overall in this particular scenario. So 0.62, that's pretty good. So going on to the next slide, let's take a look. There's some that did really well, some didn't do so well. So let's take a look at that. I can then pull out exactly how I define that and say, okay, is my definition correct? Is this truly what we're looking for? Do I need to clarify that? I can take a look at those 4 students that in the 4 groups that did really well and say, what did they do that was different from the 3 that didn't do so well? I can watch those videos because that's all tagged to their videos as well in the SimCapture system. I can look at other things, you know, how did we pre-brief? What did we set up for our students so they could be successful? How is training going on. This one has a standardized patient. Is my standardized patient queuing appropriately to the different groups, or do I have different queuing going on depending on who my standardized patient is? So there's a lot of different things that I can then take a look at if I see something that's not correlating well. Next slide. So after taking this deeper dive, we did a lot of different, what we ended up doing, we did realize that we needed to beef up our pre-briefing and what they did prior to coming into SIM. We put some YouTube videos for them to take a look at, and we defined some things a little bit better for them so they could be successful in SIM. We also looked at our standardized patient training as well and kind of standardized that a little bit clearer too. And you can see from fall of 23 to spring of 24, we now have gone up quite significantly in our caring end of program student learning outcome. So this is pretty powerful data then to show to the faculty, hey, this really worked. Now this is only 2 groups, and I know we need to look at it more longitudinally, but at least it's giving us some data at different points at times. The nice thing too is we were able to identify other areas that maybe in our curriculum we were struggling with. So like with collaboration, we're really looking at communication and that SBAR like Amy talked about, they're really struggling with SBAR. So it created a big conversation amongst the faculty. How do we define SBAR? How are we teaching SBAR? What can we do to help the students with that collaboration piece? So it created a lot of different discussions amongst faculty and looking at how we can even strengthen our program just by this one mental health piece of things. So if you want to go to the next slide there, Amy. So overall, lessons learned, SimCapture really allowed for easy collection of data and analysis. It's just some points and clicks. You can copy what you've done and copy it over to a new course. It's really user-friendly. I started this in fall of 23, so this is only my 2nd year working with this. But I've now transferred that into SimCapture for Skills. And we were actually using SimCapture for Skills for them to practice peer-to-peer, have them do a self-eval. I can actually assign it to the student to then watch themselves and evaluate themselves watching their video. And they can see how well they did or didn't do. And then once they did those 2 things, they would do a final test out video. And then the faculty would actually score them instead of having them coming into the lab, which actually helped decrease some of their anxiety level of being tested out because they can re-record that skill over and over and over again until they submit it. Guess what? That means they're practicing more. That means they're able to then really, it solidifies what they're doing well because they're watching themselves and they're practicing more and noticing what they're not doing well and re-looking at that video. And so I haven't looked at the data yet on the SimCapture for Skills because that was last spring and I haven't quite looked at that data yet, but we've had some really good feedback from the faculty. They really love it. We're not having to do as many 2nd and 3rd retests like we had when we were doing face-to-face, and they're doing better in the clinical setting with their skills. The even better lesson learned is by having data that really helps support what's going on, using it more as a formative assessment and not high stakes, just formative. The faculty are now seeing the benefits of simulation as well as the SimCapture for Skills, and I've unleashed the Niagara Falls with my faculty, and they now they're looking at so many different ways of using even SimCapture for Skills in the clinical setting, having them maybe do a video of an SBAR on their patients and have the faculty grade that as part of learning too. So there's a lot of things that we're just scratching the surface right now with some of the SimCapture things, and I look forward to using it more. And that's what I have to share. If people have questions, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll go from there.
Stacy, I'll say I had the pleasure of visiting Stacy's campus a few weeks ago because I also live in Minnesota, and watching her students practice and have discussions. They were handing task trainers back and forth between backpacks to say, oh, I have to go home and do my wound check off. Does anyone have a wound assessment I can take home that they brought back? They're all gone. And it was just really neat to see how students were so excited to head home and practice because they had that flexibility offered to them and they knew exactly what they were going to be practicing and then to watch your sims unfold. We'll have to have a whole nother webinar on that, Stacy. So thank you for sharing your story of how you've used sim capture and sim capture for skills along with your mannequins from Laerdal to really make a difference in your program. It's quite impressive.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. So I know we've gone through so much content in just 46 minutes. If there's any questions or things we can elaborate on, please let us know. Either pop them in the chat or I think that there's a Q&A button, Helen.
Yes,
There
there
is
is.
a Q&A. Please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A.
Yes, and it looks like there's one in the chat, Stacy, about if it'd be possible for others to connect with you to learn more about how you connected your simulation outcome to your end of program student learning outcomes.
I would be all for helping anybody. Feel free to reach out to me. Stacy.chu, just like it is on there, at rctc.edu is my email address. So feel free. I can't say enough with the Laerdal support that I've received from my impact manager. I couldn't have done this without Erin. She is truly amazing, and I know they have lots of impact managers out there to help assist as well. So, but I'm happy to talk to anyone.
Stacey, actually, there was a question about the support that you received for implementing your data. Do you mind just talking a little bit more about that and maybe a little bit more about that impact manager and how that worked out?
So what's really nice is with your impact manager, you're always paired up with an impact manager when you have sim capture. And Erin's mine, and we met weekly for a while there as she was showing me all the different intricacies. And what I didn't even mention on sim capture, which I'm really excited about, it's brand new, is their EMR. And you have an electronic medical record that you can customize how you want it to look. And that just came out in August. I haven't played with it a whole lot yet, but I'm excited to look into it a little bit further and add to it, add to what I'm doing. But we have meetings one-on-one. I say, okay, this is what I'm doing. What do you think? How do we do this? You know, and where I all started, I didn't start with a grading tool. Let's start with something simple. I did the post-that-M, the simulation survey. We've been doing this for years on paper, on various different survey applications, but we never really did anything with the data. And she goes, well, what about doing a pre-brief scenario and debrief, you know, question category? Wow, that just really opened things up because now I can look at my simulations and, you know, the learners are filling this out and they're pre-brief, you know, they're thinking it's okay, scenario, okay, debrief is where it's at. Well, but it also gives me a touch point too. And if there's other faculty that are doing this, like I noticed in my second semesters, my numbers were a little bit lower. Well, do I have to give some education to my faculty of how to do this more appropriately and look at how can I support them to get to the numbers that I would like to see for those? So there's so many different things you can use it for. We're using it for an IS-bar communication thing right now across the curriculum. So it'll be interesting to look at that data at the end of the semester. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this.
Thanks, Stacey. I do see a question about VR clinicals and the debriefing from Anne, and it says, is there generally a group debriefing after students complete and reflect on simulations individually? And yes, we do advocate that you should hold group debriefs after the VR clinicals experience. And in your instructor resources with VR clinicals, we've provided debriefing guides to help navigate what can be a pretty complex debrief with 2, 3, and 4 different patients across 3 different levels. And so you have a lot of educator resources about what should you focus your debriefs on. If your students are struggling with this or that type of topic, what are some things that you should cover, and really focusing it back to the learning outcomes of each experience. So yes, definitely recommend after students do a reflection, but it doesn't have to be immediate. A lot of the schools we see are allowing students to practice, you know, in the lab, and then at the end of that day or the next day, whenever they can, you know, convene the group, they'll then have the VR debrief after that. So that's why we built in the reflection piece, to be sure that students can solidify that learning, walk away, making sure they have a correct understanding, and then also be prepared for a robust debrief as well.
And that would be part of the NASCO standards too, looking at that is even like with your other ones, not just the VR ones, but the other, I'm drawing a blank, Amy. The other,
the VSIM, the
the
screen-based.
VSIM, the
Yes.
screen-based sims too, you still want to do some type of debriefing after that as well. We used those during the COVID months. And it was really important. We noticed that we did bring those students back for that debriefing piece, making sure they got the correct information they needed.
And I think that's so important to bring up that, you know, with VSIM or VR clinicals, the flow of the content is really meant to be built to the NACSL standards of best practice, that they have this pre-reading, you know, preparation phase, so that they're set up for success before entering the simulation. It's clear on the expectations before they go in, they go through the experience, and then they all come with guided reflection and debriefing questions for the student and then also for the instructor, so that you have that, you know, correct learning experience, or quality learning experience, I should say. Thanks for pointing that, Stacy.
Isn't data? Data is just wonderful. It's so powerful.
It really is. You know, Stacy's been doing this for just over a year now, and she
Just
already
over a
has so
year.
much data.
I've only scratched the surface with you guys. I've got a lot I've been working on. So
Yes. Yeah. So it really can show the value of your program, but also just the value of the learning experiences you're providing, whether that's in skills, sim, or clinical. Sim capture, when paired, you know, kind of like this pyramid suggests on the screen here, when it's paired with the other resources and solutions that we have at Laerdal, it can really create some powerful learning experiences to improve those learning outcomes. And so we hope that that has helped you today as we walked through that together.
Amy, another question came in regards to scenarios and what
Yeah.
Laerdal offers with scenarios. Would you mind answering
Yeah.
that?
Of course, yeah. So we do have Scenario Cloud, which is our library of pre-programmed and pre-written scenarios with by ourselves, but also with our partners. So the National League for Nursing, the American Academy of Pediatrics, just to name a few. There's quite a few that are in there. So you can get access to Scenario Cloud, and then those will all be pre-written. You can certainly edit or adapt those for your local needs if you needed to. But they, I know for sure the NLN ones. And the AAP ones too, I think, have all been piloted and tested already. So that work has been done for you. And then they are also pre-programmed for our LEAP software, which is what our mannequins run on, so that you don't have to program in the actual software. You can download the scenario from Scenario Cloud and run it right away on LEAP, which is very helpful when you're maybe the only person running Sims at your institution, like I know Stacy is right now. And I'm sure many of you are.
So special equipment with sim capture. So it's a cloud-based system. So it's just it's a website that you go to that you can log in, and you can log in from anywhere on it. And that's really nice and adaptable, because then the students can log in on their phones, they can log in on their tablets, they can log in on their computers, wherever they want to, they can log in on.
Sim capture does have a component of our cameras for recording simulations and things like that. So if you needed that, that would be equipment you would need, but otherwise the actual sim capture software is just cloud-based and accessible through any really web-enabled device. Helen or Jeannie, anything to add to that?
Nope, that's it's pretty simple. You don't really need much. The cameras and the laptop, and you should be good to go with some capture. There is one more question for you, Amy, and
Sorry,
this is
Helen, before you go to the next topic, she just had a follow-up of
Oh.
what if you already had recording devices?
Oh.
You can still use sim capture. correct?
That's correct.
Sorry, I just want to make sure before we pivoted. Go ahead with your question. Sorry, Helen.
Yeah, no problem. It definitely is a pivot. Someone asked about getting started. Like, I guess maybe there's some newer programs offering simulation, and they're wondering just how to get started in general and kind of being overwhelmed with the options that are out there in the marketplace. Do you have any suggestions around that?
So kind of depends on if they're brand new to getting started. I would just say think about um, what do you need for your students? What are some things that your students may or may not see that you want to do in the sim lab? If you have a sim lab, if you don't, that's a whole different discussion of where to start there. Um, but really start thinking about what's important. And then I would say start with something easy to evaluate. You don't have to go into quite the depth that I have at this point, but I would say start with something easy. Maybe start with that set M and kind of see how that rolls. And then as you start to get familiar with how to do the evaluation tools, use your impact manager. She will be phenomenal in helping you kind of guide you on some of those first steps as well.
I think too, it doesn't have to be your whole program that you start with. You can start with one course, one class session. Maybe you're doing one skill this semester that you want to switch over to Sim Capture for Skills, or maybe you want to put vSim in one course right now and see how it works for you and how to set it up. You can choose what is really, obtainable. You don't have to do the whole pie at once.
Right. Well, and that's how I started. I started with our mental health course because I figure if I can do it in mental health, med surg is much easier. And so I started with mental health, and then what's working in mental health, I'm just repeating into my other courses.
We have a question. We want clarification. Sim capture and sim capture for skills.
So you want me to take that on, Amy?
I can tell you, it doesn't matter. I know you might even know it better than me at this point, Stacy. You use it every day, but Sim Capture is
Sim capture is the broader
overarching system. Yep. And so it has multiple components to it, and one of those components is Sim Capture for Skills. So
depending on the level that you purchase.
So I'm going to say if you purchase an enterprise solution, which is kind of the full kit and caboodle of Sim Capture, you have Sim Capture with Skills included. And if you already have purchased Sim Capture and you think you're at the enterprise level, you can talk with your impact manager and make sure that that has been enabled for you to use. So it does sit under the Sim Capture umbrella. It is an additional product. And Helen, can you buy Sim Capture for Skills as a standalone product?
Yes, you can buy it as a standalone product. You can actually, there's two different options with that. We have one that's already paired with a task trainer. It's called the Modular Skills Trainer. And then we also have one that's standalone as well. So you do have those two options.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great information to know. I want to, again, just let you know, we have this on recording and we will be sharing this. If anyone wants to view or review our webinar today. And we are almost at the top of the hour. We would welcome your questions. Again, thank you for our Odin partners. Brian from Odin, love to connect on our programs that have already implemented the competency-based education. So please share. We are eager to share our information. I want to make sure we don't have questions.
If you're coming to the National Odin Conference, be sure to look out for us. I don't know our booth number off the top of my head, but please come visit us at Laerdal's booth. And I'll also be doing a workshop for 3 hours where we'll spend a lot more time going through this content. So if you're there, we'd love to see you.
And if anybody's coming to the Laerdal Sun Conference, I'm doing a big presentation as well on all my findings that I've been working on with evaluating SIM.
Excellent. And before we end the webinar, Stacy and Amy, do you mind sharing your email addresses and your contact information one more time?
Sure. You can just type it in. Is that okay?
Sure. And also, I just wanted to drop one last nugget. We do have a trade-in program that is happening up until the end of the year. It ends at the end of December, and you can trade in pretty much any mannequin that you have for a newer one. So take a look. I just dropped the link in the chat. But Nursing and Simulator, which we talked about earlier on this call, that's a part of the trade-in program. So get rid of the old, bring in the new, and we're here to help you with that. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.